one tiny green nettle weevil, 70 photographs, and one apparently ruined focus stack. When I saw this image on my computer, I thought it was destined for the recycle bin. The culprit? A pair of antennae that spent the entire shoot waving around like an over-caffeinated orchestra conductor. But before you delete your own failed stacks, let me show you how I rescued this image using Helicon Focus and Photoshop, and why some ruined stacks aren't nearly as hopeless as they first appear. Meet the culprit. This little green nettle weevil looked perfectly cooperative while I was photographing it at a local nature reserve. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Whilst I was concentrating on taking the focus stack, the weevil had other plans and spent much of the sequence enthusiastically waving its antennae around as if it was conducting a tiny insect symphony. And the result looked like this. And at first glance, it really doesn't look too promising. You may have seen my previous video where Michael and I visited a local nature reserve in search of insects, flowers and other small wonders. Among all the subjects that we photographed that day, this green nettle weevil turned out to be one of my favourites. But looking at the finished image now, you'd just never guess quite how chaotic the original stack looked. The photographs were taken using my Olympus OM1 camera and the 90mm macro lens mounted on a tripod and photographed in natural light. The final stack consisted of 70 images. I loaded the 70 raw files into Helicon Focus and processed them using Method C with the smoothing set to 1. As the software works, you can watch it build up a map of the sharp areas from each photograph. I always find this fascinating because you can gradually see the final image emerging from the individual frames. And everything looked perfectly normal during the processing. Then came the moment of truth. As soon as the stack finished rendering, the problem became obvious. Our little weevil had clearly decided that sitting still was overrated. Its antennae had moved throughout the sequence, creating this rather impressive collection of ghost antennae. You certainly don't need to zoom in to spot the problem, and at first glance this looks completely unusable. And when I first started focus stacking, this is exactly the sort of image that I would have deleted immediately. I assumed it was beyond repair. But fortunately, experience has taught me that movement doesn't automatically mean disaster. The real skill isn't avoiding every failed stack, because insects rarely cooperate with our photographic ambitions. It's learning which images can be rescued. And this one is actually a very good candidate. You can tell by zooming in that the majority of the weevil has rendered very well, and it's only the antennae that have moved. One of the features that I really like in Helicon Focus is the retouching tool. Instead of accepting the software's stacking decisions, you can manually tell it which areas to use from individual source images. This allows you to replace the problematic sections with cleaner versions from the original stack. There's actually a new beta version available now which reportedly makes the process even easier, although I've not had a chance to try it yet. For this image, I'll just start by repairing the antennae movement using Helicon's retouching tools. And as you'll see, the process is surprisingly straightforward once you understand how it works. And I'll speed parts of this section up slightly so you don't have to watch every brush stroke, but I'll explain exactly what I'm doing as I go. As you can see here, I'm starting at the very base of the antennae and I'm choosing the corresponding image on the left hand side. If you hover the mouse over the part of the antennae that you want to start retouching with, it'll come up with the image number, that's the source image on the left, and you'll choose that in the little box on your right. And then you'll choose the size of the brush you want to use and how much of that brush, what percentage of it you want, how soft you want the brush to be or hard you want it to be, using these sliders on the right hand side. And here you can see I'm trying to paint over the antennae that I don't want with clean background from another image on the left hand side. And then you just go through the parts of the antennae and paint back in the main part of each antennae, but you have to work out which antenna is going to give you the best result, because you can see there's several of them ghosted there, and you try and look to see which one has most of it in focus. Sometimes you can get an entire antenna painted back in, other times you have to just take sections and then work on the rest in Photoshop. So here you can see I'm using the brush and I'm just painting in from the base. I always find it best to start at the very base of the antennae and then work up and outwards. But I'm also retouching some little areas around the snout as well. So I will speed this up slightly now as I go along, just retouching little areas. I tend to use a small brush sized about 8 to 10 to retouch the antennae or small sections of the Weevil. But when I retouch the background, I choose a larger brush with a much softer feathered edge, often set below 10 so that I don't leave any harsh lines in the background. This also helps in blending in the background. and I usually drop it down to around about 5 in the hardness for the best background results when painting over the antennae. Even though this means painting over them several times, I just find that it gives me the best result. As you can see, there's also a little bit of ghosting behind the head as well, and I need to retouch that. I think the Weevil moved its head in the last 1 or 2 frames, and that's what that is from. And again, that is actually easy to retouch because it was only a couple of frames where it moved its head. It's just a case of finding the hard edges along the main edge of the head there and painting in the background behind those ones. I do start this with a very small brush along the edge of the head, and then I increase my brush size and make it softer just to blend in that background and make it all totally seamless. I also tend to go around the edges of the Weevil and just make sure that that's all right as well. You do find you get a little bit of sort of shadowing around the edges of many subjects that you do focus stacking with. That is sometimes just down to simple focus breathing, the nature of focus stacking really. And it's very easy to clean up like this, as you can see. Once you've done it a couple of times, it just becomes second nature. I used to do this in Photoshop. I didn't know how to retouch in Helicon, and it took me forever in Photoshop. So it's definitely worth doing it in your focus stacking software, whether it's Zareen or Helicon or whatever other software you've got. So I will speed this bit up until we've finished. Once I've done the best job that I can around the antennae and the edges of the Weevil, I also like to zoom right out and I check around the outsides. And sometimes it's well worth just blending out some of the outside parts of the image just to make it look a little bit nicer. This is also a good time to look around the image for any lines created by dust spots and hot pixels, which are often exaggerated by focus stacking. And at this stage, the image is already looking significantly better. The antennae look much more natural, and we've removed most of the obvious stacking artifacts. However, there's still a few areas that I'd like to tidy up, and that's where Photoshop comes in. Once I'm happy with the Helicon retouching, I normally export the image and open it into Photoshop. However, I was unable to fully retouch the antennae as they'd moved too much. But I did notice that there's sections of the antennae in some of the original images that are in focus, which I could copy and paste in my final retouched stack. To choose which images are likely to work best, I usually use Adobe Bridge, and I zoom in on the full screen previews of the source images to determine which will give me the best antennae parts. Then I tag each of these with a colour or a number so that I can open them all together, along with my retouched stack in Adobe RAW. This way I can make global adjustments to all of these at the same time. And if you prefer Lightroom or other software, I'm pretty sure there'll be a way that you can do it in there too. But I rarely use Lightroom, so I'm just going to stick with what I use most. So I opened these 4 source images and my stack into RAW. I noticed that I had photographed them using the vivid setting on my camera, so I changed this to natural. And then I wanted to change the blacks in my image, as there's a lot of black on the Weevil. If I ever want to print the final image, I don't want any blacks ruining a print, so I adjusted those globally first. Then I made some targeted adjustments in the dark areas first, slightly reducing the blacks and the shadows in the darkest areas only. I did tweak the global highlights slightly. Whilst the histogram didn't show any evidence of blown highlights on the metallic scales, I do know from experience that even when this is the case, when you zoom in and check those scales at 100% or more, there can be tiny areas where the highlights are too bright. So I just tweak a -5 and that helps. I also tweaked the white balance, and then I made sure that all my settings applied to all 5 images, and then I sent those straight into Photoshop. For this final stage, I'm not doing anything particularly complicated, just a few simple cleanup techniques that can help polish the image and remove any remaining distractions. Often this part only takes a few minutes, but those few minutes can make a surprising difference to the finished photograph. I'll work through the process step by step so you can see exactly how I approach it. I noticed there was a bit of a ghost of a leg in the retouched image, so I went to my source images and I found one that had a nice clean area of background near the same leg. And I selected a feathered area from here, and then I pasted that into my stacked image. I created a mask on this layer. Then I selected the bottom original layer of my stacked image. and I clicked on the Select Object tool. I let Photoshop do its thing in selecting the Weevil shape, and once it had selected the Weevil, I clicked back onto the layer that I had pasted in, specifically clicking on the mask itself. I then filled this selected area with black before deselecting it, and this made quite a difference to the area, as you can see as I switch it on and off there. I then moved on to the antennae closest to me. Choosing the source image with the most in focus on the tip of the antennae, I selected a feathered area around the antennae end. And then I copied this, and then I pasted it into my final stacked image. And then just moved that into place. Which it did fit quite well, luckily. As you can see. I then chose a brush to just mask out some of the areas where it joined, just to help it blend in a little bit better there. Despite the images having been edited identically, I still found that the source image actually had a lighter background than the end result image. So I wanted to alter that slightly. So just using the mask and a black brush again, I used a very large feathered black brush. And with a lower opacity, I decided I would just blend out some of that, just removing it very lightly so it would blend into the background a little bit better. Not removing it entirely. That would have been a longer process doing it that way because the ends of the antennae didn't quite fit identically. So I chose to do it this way instead. The other antennae had moved too much to create a full antennae in focus on this occasion. And I actually quite like it falling out of focus along with the background. It kind of adds to that sense of depth. So I then merged my edited layers into one, and I proceeded to check around the image for any distractions such as this white blob and other debris on the leaf. Also just checking for any stacking artifacts. I used the patch tool for some spots and the spot healing brush for other parts. And once my cleanup was finished, I made slight adjustments in levels, and then I added a vignetting and I cropped my image. What I particularly like about this workflow is that it allows you to save images that might otherwise just be discarded. Sometimes a photograph only needs a little help rather than a trip to the recycle bin. So here's the finished result. Comparing it to the original stack, it's hard to believe that they're the same image. What initially looked like a complete failure turned out to be one of my favourite photographs from the entire outing. The details are sharp, the antennae look natural again, and most importantly, the image has been saved. Before we finish, I wanted to show you a couple of additional examples from other insect photographs. These images suffered from a similar stacking issue caused by movement during the sequence. So I'll start with the original versions and the repaired results. Again, what initially looked like failed stacks turned out to be entirely salvageable, with a little patience and some careful retouching. So next time you find yourself staring at a focus stack filled with ghost antennae, blurry legs, or other signs that your subject refused to sit still, don't be too quick to delete it. You might be surprised just how much can be rescued. If you found this useful, let me know in the comments whether you've ever managed to save a stack that you thought was beyond repair. And if you'd like to see more macro photography tips, techniques and close-up adventures from the tiny world around us, I'd love to have you along for the journey. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.